I was one of these kids that didn't know what they wanted to do when they grew up. I went to school and kind of fell into being a psychology major, didn't really know what I was going to do with that, and kind of graduated still very unsure. And I think along the journey, it was kind of in tandem that I realized my own anxiety and my own family dynamics coming to light. And I started going to therapy personally while I was in grad school. I definitely had disordered eating all through high school and beyond. And I think when I got into my sophomore year of college, I was just feeling really stuck in that. This is something maybe I should get checked out. And I just didn't love the therapist I saw. So I shut down from it.
A lot of people who get into the helping professions, it's, I was going through things personally and that inspired me or that informed me and then I became a helper. Or people were kind of set and had that natural helping tendency. And oh, by the way, I had personal experiences that kind of reinforced that for me. So which of those stories fits you? How did you get into this situation?
I'm not sure exactly which story fits me, probably more the latter, but I think that, I know this. I was one of these kids that didn't know what they wanted to do when they grew up. And I was saying before that I went to school and kind of fell into being a psychology major, didn't really know what I was going to do with that, and kind of graduated still very unsure. No idea what I wanted to do, was just kind of I guess I have to go to grad school. And I picked social work because I didn't want to take another test. And I was like, there's so many options. I'll figure it out. I won't be a therapist. And then kind of the Cliff Note version is I took a year and a half off. I went to grad school for social work. And my first year internship was in a school. I really loved it. And then my second year internship was acting as a children's therapist at a clinic. Loved that too. And I was like, I guess I'm a therapist. I guess this is what I like to do. And I think along the journey, it was kind of in tandem that I realized my own anxiety and my own family dynamics coming to light. And I really think it kind of happened at the same time. And I started going to therapy personally while I was in grad school. I went once before when I was 19 for 2 sessions, and I guess it just wasn't ready. And that was also because I was feeling anxious and I had some eating stuff. Yeah, so I don't know. I still don't know which one came first, but I think that helping thing was just part of my personality.
I have a similar path there in some regards, but isn't it funny how you go get the psychology degree, right? And you think you're going to do psychology and you think that you're going to do all this stuff, and they let you know after it's too late to back out, right? Oh, there's a lot more after this. You know what I mean? It's not a 4-year degree and move on. So
it's one of those things that I think psychology is really interesting, even if you don't do it for a living. It's just something I honestly think it should be a core class because you learn so much about yourself and your surroundings. But yeah, there's not much you do with a bachelor's in psychology using that degree. So it's kind of all right, you're up for more school, which isn't my favorite part, but it's part of it.
Yeah. And when you said that, I felt like I had to go to grad school. That's how I was too. Well, if I'm going to do anything with this, I have to continue on and did. And it turned out great. But I was not somebody who sat there my senior year of high school and I can't wait to go do all this schooling. And I can't wait. I went to play sports and fell into this along the way. And so thankful I did. But it's funny how life circumstances can kind of position us for those experiences that change things for us. So interesting. So you'd mentioned that your own kind of therapeutic journey dabbled in it as a teenager, got more serious in college. So, were you dealing with feelings of anxiety or any kind of personal symptoms all along and you didn't know what to call that or recognize that till you had your schooling? Or did you kind of have a sense that something was going on there?
I think I didn't really know what was going on. I had friends in high school, without sharing their stories, that had some more serious mental health stuff going on. And that was the only thing I understood about mental health, that if you either are so mentally ill or things are going on that you need a lot of help in a lot of different ways. And it was only for people who had very much the stuff that people try to deal with now. It's kind of this dynamic stuff. There's always big picture, big T trauma, big stuff. And that was really my only understanding. And then when I was a little bit older, like I said, I had eating stuff. I wouldn't necessarily say I had a full-blown eating disorder, but I definitely had disordered eating and stuff all through high school and beyond. And I think when I got into my sophomore year of college, I was just feeling really stuck in that. So that kind of led me to kind of be okay, this is something maybe I should get checked out. And I just didn't love the therapist I saw. So I shut down from it. I talk about this with my friends in the field and my good friends in my life all the time. I don't even know if I even heard the word anxiety and even until college. But after that, really is when I started really understanding it as anxiety. I joke about this now because it's funny looking back. But I was working as a therapist in my internship, and my therapist at the time had to tell me I had a panic attack. I had no idea that I actually did. And it kind of opened my eyes to the fact that there's like, anxiety is a lot bigger than we think it is. There's a lot more, it's like a spectrum. There's a lot wider breadth than we think. So yeah, I mean, I guess to answer your question directly, I think it's just, I think it evolved. I think as I learned more in my head, I also started learning more in my body, and people were kind of sharing things along the way. It was a lot of like absorbing information at the same time.
And that's an excellent point you make too about it's not always the dramatic, I'm not crazy, or I have to have a hospitalization, or like those very obvious symptoms, right? Things that are dissociative or schizophrenic or something like that. I think oftentimes, at least in the past, in movies, media, things like that, that's how the person who needed mental health treatment was portrayed, right?
Sure.
The coat that zips up in the back, right? And your arms are across your chest. And it's such a, and there is that exists. The Shutter Island stuff is real. But this evolving understanding of mental health is something that can be evolving and optimized, and you can feel better. You can manage those symptoms. There can be things that are happening day to day that can be dealt with, that can improve your quality of life, improve your experience that you're having. Don't necessarily require the dramatics, right? It's like, so now my understanding is that it's like going to the gym, right? It's not about being in perfect shape. It's like, you can be in better shape, you can maintain, and it's kind of a daily investment in your overall functioning. So, I love that. I love that you sharing that, because even people who got into the field, we weren't given a great background on understanding the spectrum of issues that are out there. You learn about Freud, you learn about Skinner, and then you start talking to some people.
It's interesting because I think as somebody who went to school for social work, I have like a good grasp on clinical stuff because I took a lot of clinical courses and all of my internships were very clinical. But I don't think I would be the therapist I am today if I didn't go to therapy myself, if I didn't explore modalities outside of what we're taught, because at the end of the day, it's not a lot. We're being taught theories, being taught techniques, but people are real people. So we can't therapy, I guess, from a textbook, which is an interesting kind of thing. And I think I like consciously always knew that. I remember being in a grad school class and kind of debating with somebody like if a therapist should cry if they were working in like hospice setting and somebody passed away, or in a pediatric oncology. And it was such an interesting thing because the people who kind of thought more textbook were like, absolutely not, you shouldn't cry. And I had a really hard time with that because I was like, but then you're not human. And again, like those philosophies differ for a lot of people, but it was definitely all happening. And I think that I, at the time, wanted to be the type of therapist that I needed. And maybe that was kind of a catalyst internally.
I mean, don't we all do that, right? We become the person we wish we had, or, to support us when we were younger. But I think to support you, to weigh in on the argument that's, not an argument anymore, but I agree with your point of that, because when you described your early experiences in therapy, you didn't say, my therapist didn't know enough. You didn't say she didn't have enough technical proficiency, or she, got the stages of change wrong. You said, I didn't like her. Which tells me you didn't connect with that therapist, right? It's not, and that's
Totally.
not not even an indictment of that therapist, because there's probably people that adore that therapist, right? But I think that baseline connection has to be there, the rapport building, the trust building. If you don't have that, all the theories in the world aren't going to be helpful to you. I just don't think so. Yeah.
The relationship's just so important. And I think like as I get deeper in this work personally, I know that the relationship with myself is really important. But having somebody, I mean, I've dabbled in so many different things that aren't clinical therapy. I've done coaching, I've done, more somatic work, all of that stuff, which I really love. But I always say like the fundamental to me is like first the therapist and the relationship, and then you can kind of like branch off into other stuff. But you want to develop that relationship first, so that you feel like you can understand like all aspects of it a little bit more. Because going straight into like reparenting yourself or inner child work, that's terrifying and weird if you don't have the baseline for other things. And yeah, I mean, again, I say it all the time, like I was literally a therapist who had no idea what my version of panic attacks looked like. And I was helping people with their panic attacks. So it's just an interesting dichotomy.
I've shared a couple times on this show, but I'll share again because it's so relevant to what we're talking about. I was the therapist who was helping people with their panic attacks during the day and having my own at night, which is which is such I say interesting now, is a horrible, uncomfortable, terrifying experience at the time, but it brings up all that other stuff of like, who am I to be helping? And I was getting a lot of positive feedback from clients. You've helped me so much, things are getting better, and I'm like, oh, that's great. And then I'd hop in my car and go, I really hope I don't have to pull over on the side of the highway and lay in the grass before I get home because I just, can't breathe. It's so interesting. It's just how that relationship can be different. What are, with your knowledge now, what are those things, and we're talking about anxiety specific, would you say that's kind of your primary interest and specialty? Is that kind of where you've evolved, where your work is really focused right now?
Yeah, I think it has happened organically. So I started my, I guess, like therapeutic career mostly working. Well, I worked with everybody kind of, but the thing I loved the most was working with children and teens. So it has evolved. I definitely work with young adults now and adults, but for the most part, that's kind of the people I see. And I think the thing that I have noticed the most is I tend to get people when they're in like a transition or like a big change in their life. And that usually comes with anxiety. So sometimes the people I work with aren't necessarily like anxiety prone or have an anxiety disorder. They're just going through the feeling of anxiety. So I feel like it's kind of always relevant because I'll work with a kid saying going into middle school or a kid transitioning into college or a college kid going into the workforce. And those are typical, I guess, quote unquote, life changes. But then you also have grief and loss and divorce and all of these changes. So I have a hard time putting myself in like a box because I think it's all just very relevant. But yeah, I enjoy working with people who are trying to cope with their anxiety. And I also feel like I work a lot with people who deal with, I don't love this word high functioning anxiety, but I'll use it because I know it's a buzzword. But high functioning to me really just means you're easier to deal with like the environment. People aren't noticing that you're as anxious as somebody who's sharing that they're anxious. I tend to work with people like that a little bit more.
They can hide it better.
Totally. You just look like probably you look on the outside like you have a better mask on. That's really all it is.
It's kind of borrowed from that functional alcoholic stuff, right? It's
Mm.
like, they hid it for so long. Their family didn't know, their work didn't know, but yet, there are all these problems and, sort of stacking up. What kind in your personal experience of this, because I'm sure your personal and professional work is ongoing. You made the comment about all these things looking back that I now see were anxiety. At the time, I didn't really interpret them as anxiety or think of them as anxiety. So can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like, what were the symptoms or the experiences that you were having that you now look back and like, oh, this was connected to my anxiety, but what did you think about it on the front end?
I did not even identify myself as an anxious person, even in the slightest until I was probably 19. And then again, didn't even think about it until I was 22 or 23. But looking back now, this is like a little kid, probably like the biggest thing I can recognize that I've just kind of come to terms with recently, or just really recognize it, is I had moved from where I was living to my house that I grew up in when I was like 6. So I had a lot of change going on. I was a new first grader in a school. My dad was working really far away. We had a new house and I was having night terrors. And I remember this, and I didn't know they were night terrors at the time, but that's what the doctor diagnosed it with. But I would like pace and I would like couldn't breathe and I would need to like, I don't know why, wash my hands, but whatever. I needed that like that cold sensation. Like, I know what I need now. So that's like the first memory I could think of that was definitely anxiety, but nobody ever used that word. And it kind of just like looking back, there's bigger things like that. And then the smaller things are really just like being unsure of like how to ask a friend to hang out or being a little bit shy in class or stressing out over homework. And a lot of the things are so easy not to catch. Like I always say this, and because my parents are, I have a good relation with my parents and I always have, but my mom is a very anxious person too. And she's kind of learned as I've learned how anxious she is. When I started driving, my mom would get so upset if I was like, I didn't call her when I started driving or something like that. And so it kind of, there's like that environmental factor and there's also that biological factor. There's just so many instances. There was a lot of self-esteem stuff. Yeah, just a lot of little things and nothing that like I for the most part, my life was okay. I was functioning, but it could have been a lot easier. And I think the other piece was like I was a good student, but it was like school avoidance of like I would get up in the morning and I'd have a headache and I didn't feel good and I didn't want to go to school and I would go like 2 hours late or whatever. And then when I got older, I got smart and would just use my absences as if they were like personal days, and my parents didn't care anymore because I was coming home with good enough grades.
Right.
So it's just a lot of different things.
I know this is an ongoing thing, so I'll have you weigh in on that. You mentioned about my mom was an anxious person. So your understanding now, do you feel that you were born sort of predisposed to anxiety, or do you believe that you learned it? Do you have a 50-50 idea on that? Just to your own personal experience, what's your take on that?
I think that it's both. I think that the whole nature nurture debate is both. I think that having an anxious parent has a lot of benefits. You really feel loved, but then you can also feel really smothered. And I think I felt both. And like to the somatic work that I've done, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it because it's a little out there. Yeah, the somatic work I've done, I feel like I came into the world as like an anxious person. But I feel like it was also like taught easy. Like I think I could have came out of it a lot easier. Cause I look back in my lineage, my entire family is a family of caregivers, a family of anxious people, a family who put other people before themselves, which on paper, that's really awesome. It's a lot of like really empathetic human beings. And it teaches things within the child or within me in this example to like put yourself last. And it doesn't work well. It doesn't work well to do that. So I feel like it is both. And I say this to all the parents because I have a lot of parents I work with that are anxious and they know they're anxious and they feel like they gave it to their child. I don't believe in that. I don't think you made your child this way. I just think that it impacts things and it'll be okay. Where my mom is my favorite person. And yeah, it wasn't so easy with some things kind of growing up. So it's definitely a mix of everything, as everything is.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
So you mentioned your parents did not give that to you. Do you mean that biologically, or do you mean that as in the kids modeling the behaviors of the parents, or both?
I honestly think it's both. I think that, yeah, kids are sponges and we can absorb a lot. And there's plenty of kids who have anxious parents that are not anxious. So we can't, and there's no data to support that it's both. I think that actually, if you are an anxious parent and your child is anxious, you have a way to meet them in a way that other people can't because you understand what anxiety looks like. And yeah, it's a lot of things. And there's like generational stuff and like people believe in generational trauma and there's a lot. I mean, our souls are made up of so many things. And I don't even say that in a spiritual way. I just say that in like, they have to be made up of so many different things.
We've got to get Eric out to Sedona with some of our past guests because you're talking about some of that far out body work. We've had some folks on here advocating for ayahuasca and the rebirthing and the stuff, and they get out into these energy vortexes and sort of like think about their soul contract and what they're here to accomplish. And it's cool stuff. I mean,
I feel like I'm very grounded and rooted in like psychology in the sense of like things that are proven, and I think that stuff is cool. I think it's interesting to learn about. And I feel like I always say, I think I'm with my clients, I'm more into the psychology piece of it and somatic stuff. But with myself, I'm like, it can get weird, but it's interesting. It helps. But I also have this foundation now of like my anxiety is so much more out there. So it's helpful for me to kind of connect with things that I haven't connected with. I don't know if I would do ayahuasca. I have friends who've talked about this, but
I haven't done it. I'm, I don't think that I'm a dad, right? I have kids and that kind of stuff. So this would be after everybody goes to college kind of thing, But there's some people who've gotten some real benefit from that, right? And you think about the ketamine studies and things like that, things that we've labeled as bad or just recreational drugs, and I think what's underlying all this is people like us who are in the field just kind of having the courage and the honesty to be, look, a lot of this we don't know. I ask these loaded questions like chicken or the egg or 50-50 percentages. We don't know. We have our personal experiences, and we have done, I say me and you, but also the field, have done a great job on an individual level, providing a lot of guidance and relief, and people are better for having had the experience, and there's real magic in the work that's happening. But I always say it's more art than science at this point. We're in our infancy. And so I just don't think there's an A plus B equals C when it comes to psychology, because there's so many variables that influence. You have to work with that individual, which goes back to that relationship you were talking about, if I say, oh, that sounds like page 72 and I read it to you, there's no value in that. So,
I mean, in the very basic form, like my bachelor's in psychology is in the Bachelor of Arts, whereas other people's are Bachelor of Science. So it just shows that there's Like there's a bunch of schools of thought, really.
And even sometimes Department of Education gets involved, especially at the master's level.
True. That's true.
So you've got education, arts, and sciences. We're all over the map. Just wherever they have some spare offices on campus, that's where they put us. So to bring it home and not have to speculate on that stuff, I'm thinking about you personally, right? So now, you're going through college, you're discovering you have this, you're learning on a technical and professional level about anxiety, you're working with clients, you're doing your personal work. So what does life look like for you now? What do you do to manage your anxiety? What do you do to maintain your homeostasis? How has your self-care and your way of moving through the world changed based on all these experiences, this knowledge that you now have compared to before?
Sure. I mean, my life has changed a lot. And I think it's important to just say, again, this caregiver thing that we talked about, my grandmother passed away 2 years ago, and my poppy passed away a little over a year ago now. So they were pretty close together, and they were very close people to me. They were another set of parents, all of that. And of course, there's grief involved. And during that journey for me, my system was in fight or flight or freeze and all that's up all the time. Like it was in some sort of trauma response of like, I just have to get through the day. And that became simultaneously, I'm in therapy trying to work on myself, but then I would come home and I would from my job at the time, and I'd be working at a school and I'd be working as a therapist to literally care for people. So I think that honestly, I say this all the time, the best thing that came out of their passing, which again, it's the hardest thing I've probably ever been through, is that I've had freedom now to actually like focus on myself in a way that I had a really hard time doing before. And I could have had it. I just, made choices that I couldn't have. So now my life looks a lot more individually focused. I have a private practice, so I have flexibility there. There's a lot of work that comes with that, but I think that there's also a lot of flexibility and freedom. And for me, I'm trying to develop routines, and I'm not the best at it because I get very sucked into work. But for me, like I am a journaler. I am somebody who likes to dabble in like interesting healing arts things. I have a life coach that I see weekly. I meditate. And I say all these things with a grain of salt because I know people roll their eyes at this because they're like, of course, that's the answer. But they are the things that ground me. And honestly, trying to have some work-life balance. But really, therapy and like coaching and learning about myself has been really helpful. I mean, and then just being in places that feel good to me. Like I love to read and I like to be in bookstores. So actually putting that fun into our lives. I heard a perspective recently that like reminded me of why you do this. You heal, or you don't really heal. You're on a healing journey, whatever that looks like for you, really to reconnect with yourself and to have fun. The whole point is to like have fun in your life. So if you get so stuck in the like, I'm trying to better myself, it's not fun anymore.
Right.
So I think that's where I'm at personally. And I think that I try to help my clients with the same way. When I work with like little clients, I'm like my little kid clients, we're just trying to get them to be kids. We're just trying to get them to enjoy stuff again. And I think that that's like the thing that I hope I bring to my clients, and what I'm trying to bring just in general is like the not so seriousness, because everything is really heavy and everything's really serious. And there's a lot of micro traumas and big traumas that happen daily that we just don't have control over. So if we can just make our environment feel calmer and nicer, then why not? I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of, I guess, where my head's at today.
No, it's great. And I love the update on your kind of personal journey with that. It's funny you say that when you make it your life's work to improve, it changes your relationship with improvement, right? Because I still have the remnants of that old kind of oppositional stuff bouncing around in my head. And, the quickest way to make me not want to do something is to convince me I have to do it, right? And that's, I mean, like I'm literally the guy that's like, I'm carrying the laundry upstairs to like put it away. And my wife yells, hey, when you get a second, can you put away the laundry? And I'm like, well, not now. Like I don't want, I still do it, right? Because I want to stay married. But I have that thought of like, I don't want to. And so any of that stuff flares up. And I think that's an interesting point you brought up about being open to the experiences and seeing it as a journey and not so much a checklist or a destination or a have to, because then the dynamic completely changes, right? Now and especially if you struggle with work-life balance right now, so all the things you have to do at work, now I've got basically a second job. My second job is working on me. And so like, where is just the openness to experience? Where is the possibility of even being present in a moment to experience anything if you're only thinking about your progress and what comes next? And that's interesting. And you said my nervous system. You have a great Instagram account. You have great social media stuff I was looking at. And you speak a lot about regulating your nervous system and what it takes to kind of regulate your nervous system. So can you give us kind of a 101 on how regulating your nervous system connects to anxiety and vice versa?
So I think, again, I will say nervous system regulation is definitely like buzzworthy right now. I see it everywhere. And again, maybe that's my world that I'm seeing it in, but I tend to see people speak on it. But there's a biological component. We have a nervous system that exists within our bodies. There are a bunch of biological terms for them. And when our body feels like we're being threatened by anything, we go into a response. And what a psychologist has kind of coined is like the freeze, fawn, flight, or fight responses. And really quickly, what they look like is if you're in a fight response, you're fighting. You're fighting for what you need. You're trying to get out of this. When you go into freeze, you're stuck. It feels like you can't move. It feels exactly what freeze sounds like. When you're going through flight, you basically run away from something. You don't want to deal with it heads on. The conflict feels like too much. And when you fawn, which is kind of the newer-ish one, it's more like that people pleasing of like, what can I do to make this better kind of mentality. And that's a very brief understanding of what those things are. But if you are an anxious person, that is what's happening when you're anxious. Your body thinks that there's a threat, or your body thinks that there's some sort of danger. So it creates this, it pumps, hormones and all of this stuff through your body to make you feel like you have to be on high alert in times where you don't have to be. And there's a good component of this too, because there are times where we do have to be on high alert and we want our bodies to function properly. But I don't have to be on high alert when you have a test. Like, you don't need to be on high alert when you have to take a test. You don't need to be on high alert to, I don't know, I can't think of any examples, but whatever. You don't need to be on high alert at the moment. So when I think of nervous system regulation, it's coming into a relationship with your body so that it's functioning in a way that it's alerting you of threat when it needs to, and not when things are okay. And when I think of regulating your nervous system, I think of two parts. I think of one is just having a relationship with your body to know that, okay, I'm in this setting right now. I'm in this part of me that feels unwell or feels nervous, and to just be able to name it. And then the second thing is, okay, what do I need right now that would make me feel more like myself? Maybe you need to have this big feeling. Maybe you need to do something that's regulating for you. When I mean regulating, I mean that's going to get you down to like an equilibrium that feels like calm and quote unquote good, or just feels settled, I guess would be a good word. Yeah. And I think it's different. And I talk a lot about like, when you think of coping skills, that like there's a few types of different coping mechanisms. And really, to me, it boils down to like either you're a distractor or you're a soother, or you're a mix of both. And if you're a soother, you're somebody who, again, wants to feel good, wants to be comforted, do things that feel comforting. If you're a distractor, you want to avoid. And you know what? Sometimes it is okay to avoid in the moment. But what I always tell my clients and tell myself is like, come back to it. When you're not feeling a 10 out of 10 anxious, come back to it and say, okay, what was going on for me before? Oh, this was going on, so that you can connect that mind body. There's so much more to it, but I think that's the most simplistic I can get, I guess.
Before we go on, I want to say a few words about Anew Behavioral Health. Anew Behavioral Health is an outpatient provider of mental health and substance abuse services in Ohio and New Hampshire. That means that Anew can successfully treat mental health and substance abuse issues or dual diagnosis if you're struggling with both. Their integrated approach allows for them to successfully address issues related to anxiety, depression, addiction, trauma, and really anything that stands between your life and the life you could be living. You really cannot bring them an issue that they have not successfully treated. They have also solved one of the biggest problems for people seeking help. They have a dedicated team waiting to hear from you at helpnow@anewbh.com. If you contact them today, within 24 hours, you will have heard back from, wait for this, a real live person, and will also have your first appointment scheduled at that time. So how do you contact them? Well, if you're in Ohio or New Hampshire, you're probably close to one of their local locations. You're welcome to go in. If not, you can always reach them online at anewbh.com. And if you're interested in services for you or loved one, use that address, helpnow@anewbh.com. Ian, I want to tag you in. What do you think? So when you are in times of stress, do you tend to, are you a fighter? Are you a freezer? Are you a fawner? Or what's the other one? What did I miss? Fight, flight, freeze.
You got it. I think you didn't say flight. You didn't say flight, but you said it now.
So do you tend to avoid stressful situations, be a fighter in the situations, be a people pleaser in the situations, or just freeze up and let it pass?
So now that I kind of reflect a little bit, I do tend to fawn sometimes. So that's that people pleasing. Freezing and fawning go hand in hand for me.
All right.
Fight or flight is not usually what I do, which is interesting.
And the fawning is new. It wasn't something even I got. So that's interesting because, and then for Ian's purposes, and also people who may fall in that category, I'd pose this to you as a pretend client. Okay, so I'd go into people pleasing mode. So what? That's good, right? How does that cause issues? Why is that something to be monitored and dealt with?
Listen, I personally probably cycle through a lot of them. Definitely the freeze, definitely the fawn. So I relate to that. But I think that, people pleasing, maybe if you don't feel like it's an issue, who am I to tell you it's an issue? I really do believe in that. And as who has some people pleasing mentalities. And I think that when we're constantly worrying about what somebody else thinks or feeling like we need to fix things, we're putting a Band-Aid on something. So it's not going to get taken care of, one. And then the second thing is, people usually don't like it. People don't want you to fix their problems. Even as a person and as a therapist, people just want to vent and they want to have a voice. And I think people pleasing could feel like the good thing to do, but you're really not pleasing anybody. You're trying to placate yourself in the situation to make yourself feel better. And I had that mentality with my mom all the time. When my mom is crying, I'm like, what can I do for you? You're fine. Let me help you. Let's fix this. And it's not what people want, and it doesn't help. It doesn't help to let people grow. And it's really, really, really uncomfortable to sit with. It is not fun. And it's possible. So my potential clients, I would challenge them a little bit and I'd be like, okay, what are you getting from this? And they'd probably be like, nothing. I'm like, what are they getting from it? And they're probably going to say nothing because they're not getting anything. It's a little harsh, but it's the truth.
Well, and there is downstream experiences and consequences to think about too, right? My daughter recently broke her arm. It was really hard for her to get rid of her cast, right? But without taking the cast off, she's never going to fully heal, right? It's very difficult to start using the arm again. I broke my leg. I had crutches. I could walk fine on crutches. On Thursday, I was fine. But if I never dropped the crutches, imagine what that was going to look like, down the road. And so I think, your point is well taken. And it's not about proving to them that it's a problem. It's more about defining what experience do you want to have in life. Do you want to carry the crutches around forever? Do you want to have the arm with the cast that stinks and your skin is falling off behind it and your arm gets to be about that big around? Or do you want to have a fully integrated experience and get to your highest potential, or at least, really have your real experience, because you're not feeling anything through the cast and you're not really walking if you're on those crutches. So
I love that. I like the defining what you want, or figuring out what you desire. It's a good one.
Because that's to me. So we all have different theoretical backgrounds, and mine is solution focus. And it's like, what is your best hope? And how do we move you, one step closer to that, right? I mean, that's really all it is.
I just realized one more thing about the stress response.
Ian's having an epiphany. We've got him working now.
This is my show now.
Go for it.
Well, I think it depends on what you're coping with, what the situation is. In some situations, for example, if you're having social anxiety, of course you're going to go to people pleasing if you're a people pleaser. But let's say you're alone at home and you're stressed from work or something, you're going to be a distractor.
So I'll challenge you softly, because you said, of course, you're going to go into people pleasing. When I have social anxiety, I leave it. I flight. I avoid it. So it's of course for you. It's not of course globally. And that's what we're talking about. It's a highly personal experience for this. So, Eric, I'm sorry I stepped on your...
No, I was thinking about that because I think that of course, is something that we all see the world through our perspective. So I think that makes a lot of sense that he's thinking, I'm sure you're thinking in your own head, okay, but that's what I would do in that situation. So I think that makes funny sense. Yeah, I think it can be different. I think somebody who's aware that they have something, if you know you have anxiety or you know you have social anxiety, to use that as example, you may, and say you're aware of these responses, I think you can actively choose something different, but it could still be a stress response. You could say, I'm going to fight through this and I'm going to tackle this. But is it coming from a place that it's actually helping, or is it coming from a place that you're still wired in that like stressful, everything feels like a threat thing? I mean, there's people out there that are complete introverts that you'd have no idea because they're literally fighting to seem like they're super outgoing, or just seeming like they're, I shouldn't say outgoing, seeming like they're being filled up. Yeah, calm and filled up from this interaction. So there's so many different avenues it could go.
So Erica's really good at this because she's tapping it. So it's funny. For the longest time, I had pegged myself as a natural extrovert, right? I like to be on stage, I like to talk. But then in one of my programs, one of the other students and my peers, and they're kind of noticed, like, she's like, actually, I don't think you are, because I was sharing that I have these sort of extreme refractory periods. Like if I go give a speech, next day I'm wiped. You know what I mean? And so the joke about my social battery has run out, right, is very true to me. Yeah. And so there's different ways to look at that. And I think it is contextual, but it's interesting to sort of observe yourself in those situations and see what's really going on beyond that immediate moment, you know?
I'm curious. What do you think I am?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, so this becomes a little
Sorry,
bit.
I'm turning it over for a second.
This becomes a little bit of like read my cards, right? You know, so it's not fair because you've told me that you've had those anxious moments your whole life, right? So I would think it'd be the same thing. I would almost like label the high functioning introvert is what I would pick up, right? I think in your natural state, and I'm also cheating here, but I see you on the floor of a bookstore, right? Recentering and finding your center. But you have these skills and you have these talents and you have this capability to impact people. So I think you put yourself out there on behalf of others. But I think in your natural state, it would probably be more inner focused and more singular. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what's interesting just about knowing this about yourself is I think introvert and extrovert is discussed as or disguised as outgoing versus shy. And that's not what it is at all. It's all about how you regain your energy. And I love people and I love talking to people and I love having deep conversations. But like you said, social battery, but just I'm going to be drained if I'm in a sensory overload situation for too long. And I have to come, my way of filling that back up is by being alone and by doing things by myself. And I think that it's just interesting. And I always like to say this because it's funny to me. If you're familiar with like the Myers-Briggs personality test, whatever, stuff, yeah. I go back and forth. I'll get like 49% introvert, 51% extrovert, 51%. So I'm like definitely like on a cusper, but yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's just more knowledge about yourself. It doesn't actually matter, but.
Yeah, it is interesting from an awareness standpoint. What is that phrase that you said? It's all about how you regain your energy. Is that what you said? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that so much. I love that because that moves it from the immediate moment and the experience of the moment and more inward and how holistically, right? Like it was experienced like before, right? So if you can get on stage and deliver this great speech, but you're sleepless for 3 nights ahead of time, right? And you're exhausted for 2 nights after or whatever, you feel this great sense of relief. It's hard to label that one thing or the other until you look at the bigger picture and how it's affecting you globally. And so it's not about like an inborn strength or deficit. It's more just how do you regain your energy? And I love that. I think that's life is hard. You go to work and that sucks and it's stressful. And then, your significant other isn't in a great mood. And so that throws your day off. And then, your team loses the game and now you're feeling some kind of stuff like that. So we're riding these waves and it's like, how do you regain homeostasis? How do you build back?
It's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot to be a person and to having a human experience. And it's really cool. And I think if we can just find, it's not even about a balance. It's just literally what you said, like riding a wave of like, okay, how do I keep coming back to myself and give myself what we need in the best way you can? Sometimes I don't give myself what I need because it's just either I don't know, or I don't have time. It's not possible. But I can still go back and go, okay, I didn't give myself what I needed now in a reflection period. It's hard to stay present all the time.
And knowing that that's personal and individual, right? What I need is different from what you need and on and on and on. So my experience and, to read, any article or to watch media or social media, things like that, they would have us believing that like depression and anxiety is exploding. Everybody has it. It's worse than it's ever been. In your practice and just kind of as a citizen of the world, are you seeing that? Are you seeing this uptick, or do you think we're just more aware?
It's a hard question. I think that during pandemic times, what I was seeing is people who prior to the pandemic knew that they were already anxious were dealing with things in a way that they were like, okay, I already thought of this as my worst case scenario, so I'm cool. Like, I'll deal with this. And then people who had never identified themselves as having anxiety or depression were like, actually, wait, I'm feeling this too. So I think there's a little bit of a combination, but I don't think it's worse. I think people are more aware, and I think that there is less stigma. And I think anxiety and depression just look very different than they used to. It is not like we talked about before, to bring it back. Yes, there are people who are really, very depressed that are in hospitalized or need extra care. And there are people who, I mean, I went through bouts of depression before and I was still working and I was still functioning. And there's different versions of it. And all of that is valid. And I think that maybe, well, my hope is that it's being normalized a little bit and that's helping people. But to the same token, I'm not a huge advocate for the label anyway. Like, if you don't feel the way you want to feel and you want to make a change or you want to understand or you want to gain a tool, great. Like, that's awesome. So I think like the media, like, I wish they would spread more just information about what it looks like or about experiences versus like scaring people into thinking that like every child's going to be depressed for the rest of their lives. Like, gets a little, it's a lot to handle.
I remember the first time an elementary school kid was talking about one of their friends and having a hard day and said, well, it's probably just her anxiety, or it's probably just, and I was like, wow, it's really penetrated down to the lowest levels here, right? Because, you know, kids would say she's having a bad day or she's being a jerk or she's, you know, they wouldn't talk about it in the most healthy terms, but they talked about it differently. And then it became this widespread thing where they were labeling with DSM level diagnosis, right? Like, oh, she's borderline. She's just a borderline. And, you know, somebody has like a mean girl moment. No, she's a borderline. You know what I mean? And it's just like, I don't know. Because I love removing the stigma for sure. And I love the normalizing. And I love the removal of judgment. But at some point when it becomes the day in and day out conversation and everybody gets a label. Here's your label, you know.
Sure.
I worry about an overcorrection there.
I think that what we need is like that, like fundamental lessons beforehand on like what these things are. And again, like we say that for everything. Like, if the kids just knew when they were 5, they won't do it when they're 13. I don't know if that's true. Like, we're all just like, we all can be jerks and like have issues, and there's hormones and all of that. And yeah, I mean, I think that just as adults have to do a better job at correcting when that stuff happens. Because borderline's not even a term. It's a borderline personality disorder, which kids typically aren't even diagnosed with. So it's just like there's a lot of different things there. And I think you said, we were joking about this before about being a narcissist and stuff like that. And that's another one. Like, every man who's ever hurt a woman right now is a narcissist. And I think, or every man that's ever hurt anybody is a narcissist. And I think that it's, in a way, it's interesting that people are understanding things, but people can gaslight without being a narcissist. And like, there's a lot of information. I would rather, and I always encourage like my younger clients too, I would rather them say like, this is what I heard. Is this true? And sometimes I'm like, I have no idea. We can't diagnose this person, but we can have a conversation around it. I think the conversation is healthy. The labeling is dicey.
That leads to my next question. So for yourself, I mean, we talked about people becoming who they wish they had when they were younger, and now you have a chance to kind of be that person in younger people's lives. So for people who suspect that they are struggling with anxiety, or a parent or a partner who loves somebody who they suspect is struggling with anxiety, do you have any recommendations early on as far as what to do to clarify that diagnosis, to investigate that possibility, or even just sort of initial coping mechanisms that if you're feeling like you're struggling with anxiety, here are some steps that I would recommend that you take?
I think and I always try to go back to this part because it's easy to get wrapped up in my world where everyone knows what anxiety is, but there's tons of, and I'm from New York, so there's a lot more information out there. But there are a lot of people who have no idea what anxiety is, not even on the most basic level. So I think if you're a parent who has heard the word and you're like, this sounds like my kid, I think it's important for you to reach out for resources first and foremost. That could look like getting your own therapist. That can look like, you know, reaching out to the school first, seeing if they have resources. I mean, even like Googling it is okay, but you take it with a grain of salt, right? Like the research aspect of it. But I think like that portion of it is why I created my course, which is Anxious Kids 101, because I want to give people the foundation for that. But I mean, first and foremost, it's you understanding the information. And then I also look at it from like an emotional standpoint. Is your child being emotionally impacted? Are there changes going on? Could they use some support? And if you choose to put your child in a supportive setting, how can you also get that support too? Because not all therapists necessarily are going to work with you and your child. But if your child's gaining all these coping skills, but you have no idea about them, then it's kind of like you're speaking two different languages. And I think getting on the page is important. And if you're an adult with anxiety, I think the same thing goes forward. Like, what is it that you feel? That's what I'd ask yourself. What is that I feel? And it could be as simple as I feel sad, or I feel like I cry a lot, or whatever it is. And what is it that you want? And maybe the answer is, I don't know what I want, but I don't want to feel this. Okay, you start there. I mean, it's at the very basic level, it's like, do you need more support? That's how I feel. I've ever done to me has anything I've ever done for myself has been looking for some sort of support or wanting to feel heard.
Such a brilliant point about getting help too, because it's so easy to label the problem, right? Like, Johnny has the problem, so Johnny is the problem. And he goes and gets help, right? And he spends, whether that's a group or an hour-long session once a week or whatever he does, and then he comes back into the system. But he's coming back into the system, right? And so the analogy there is like pulling on a side of a spider web. Like the whole system is going to pull and change based on the changes that your child is going through. And you want to be able to have the vocabulary to keep up with that, or have new terminology, or look at your contribution to it. Not saying you caused the problem, but, hey, when I do this, it triggers those fight or flight mechanisms in my child. And I want to have them go through that less. So how can I be supportive? When you say the systems of support, always been a search for more support. What are those levels of support? Like, what are some ways to support somebody with anxiety? What are some ways, if you have anxiety, to support yourself?
When you're looking for support in the home, whether it be supporting yourself or supporting somebody else, I think it starts with like an open conversation. And it can be as simple as, if you're a parent talking to your child, of like, hey, I'm noticing this. Like, what do you think about this? And I think it's curiosity. I honestly try to think of everything from a curiosity standpoint, not a judgmental, not a, this is what I think, this is what we should do. It's just like, hey, what do you think about this? And yeah, some of your kids are going to be like, I don't know, what are you talking about? But at least you're starting a connective conversation. And I think connection is a big piece. If you're noticing your child's off, whether it's anxiety or something else, how can you connect with them more? Are there activities you could do together? Are there, can you color together? Can you remind them like, hey, like I have bad days sometimes? Like, it really is very basic communication and connection. Because if your child feels connected to you, most of the time, I won't say 100%, most of the time they're going to tell you something, or something is going to come out in some way or another. So being aware and curious. But as far as like more tangible tips and stuff like that, I think if you're not an anxious person, but you already know your child is anxious, it's supporting them by asking them, okay, like, noticing that you're anxious right now, do you need support, or do you need to be left alone? Or giving them like two questions or two specific choices. If you're an anxious person, I think getting in touch with like what the signs are that you're feeling anxious is really important. And coping with it can look like anything. Anything can be a coping skill that's not maladaptive. I mean, reading a book for 5 minutes could help. It could be, it can be breathing. It can be really anything. Drinking some water. Hard to give a list of like coping skills, because anything can be helpful if you're using it in a way that's meant to be supportive. But I do think a lot of it's connection. Like, how can I feel connected and heard? We all feel so much better when we feel like somebody understands us, or somebody is making the attempt to understand us.
Yeah, they genuinely care. That genuine curiosity, I think, is such a huge point that you're making, right? Instead of, to rushing in to solve it, or rushing in to fix it, or rushing in to judge it. I mean, even unintentionally, right? Oh, I did bad on my test. It's just one spelling test. Quit freaking out. Like, that's you're discounting their entire experience right there.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you have to talk for 8 hours about the spelling test, but, a simple, that must be hard. What's that like for you? Tell me more. There are simple questions you can just kind of repeat over and over and over that are opening the door for engagement. And you make a good point. Kids will connect, right? Because if you're feeling disconnected from your child or your loved one, imagine what they must be feeling, right? When you play such an important role and their experience. So yeah, no, that's good. Tell me more about your Anxious Kids 101. I didn't know about this, so give me the information here.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm not very good at marketing myself. I'm trying to get better at it. It's not my favorite part. But Anxious Kids 101 is a virtual course that I created. Honestly, it's been 2 years in the making. I just launched it in the fall of last year. It's a virtual course, 3 jam-packed modules, all about understanding. It's for parents and caregivers, understanding what anxiety is at the most basic level. It kind of talks about a lot of things we've kind of talked about, like trauma responses. All the videos are really bite-sized, and there's a bunch of tools that you can use. And then my favorite part really is the last module is full of practical tips you can use and connection tools, because you can do that module with your child afterwards the first time. And really the goal was to come up with something that was semi-affordable or enough. I mean, give you guys a baseline of what anxiety looks like and how you can help your child. And I think it's really beneficial both for people who have their child in therapy and people who are not ready to have their child in therapy. It's not a replacement for therapy, but it allows the parent to have that educational baseline for things. So it's really a culmination of everything. It's a lot of tools that I use in sessions with clients. It's a lot of tools that I use myself. It's a lot of information. But again, I created it in a way that I think is easily digestible. And I think that's the reason I wanted to create it.
I mean, Erica, this is a big deal. Sounds like an incredibly valuable resource, something that I wish that I had in practice 1,000 times, right? Because we talked about this earlier in the podcast. Most of the information is coming from the media or social media, which is a really bad place to get your information. You mentioned Google, every time I Google my symptoms, I end up with I get a brain tumor, right? Like without a doubt, right? So it's like, It's kind of a scary rabbit hole to go down. But it sounds like the goal is some good, solid, kind of evidence-based education that'll get parents up to speed on what they're really dealing with and how to understand, what their child is going through. I mean, it's an amazing resource.
Thanks. Yeah, and the goal is eventually to try to have a sliding scale. I mean, it costs, I don't even know what, $237, but again, it's like hours of material and you have it for a lifetime. But the goal really is to add more to it over time, to share more information, to make it more of a community eventually, just because I think that I want everyone to have it. I mean, I ran it. Some of my clients' parents were initial people that kind of went through the course to see if there's anything missing. And, I've had some other therapists and stuff like that run through the course because I really just want it to be digestible. And I don't want to overwhelm anybody with more information. I want to help them with information that is actually going to matter versus, like you said, Googling and hearing that, all right, your kid needs medication. That's just a whole thing.
Yeah. Or, watch out for suicide, right? Right off the bat. And now everybody's terrified. How long is it? You say modules and course. I mean, what's the investment time-wise?
I think it's about 4 hours, something like that. But you can go at it at your own speed. Once you purchase it, it's yours for the taking. You could go back and forth. I always recommend that you go through it in order the first time, but then you can go back to the modules that matter. I mean, I think that the course in itself is meant for you to have it to rely on when you need a reminder for certain things. And also there's worksheets and things like that. And then there's tools, there's games, there's things that you can use with your child after the fact that's meant to help you. It's meant to help the family connection and to help you feel like you guys can thrive. And also just to build some confidence in your child. Because I think a big anecdote to anxiety or a big coping skill for anxiety is developing more self-esteem and feeling more confident, because then you feel confident in spite of anxiety. I don't promise that it's going to make your child less anxious or child's going to, defeat their anxiety. I don't think that's the point. I think the point is for you to feel more equipped with tools so that they also can feel super supported.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So to seize on that a little bit. So when you have that insecurity, the lack of confidence, I don't believe the answer is in the removal of the symptomology. I think the answer is in the introduction of competence, right? Which will then breed confidence, and so it's not, to put it in more simple terms, if they're concerned about their looks or whatever, it's not about, no, you're not ugly. No, I don't want to take all that away. What I want to do is I want to point to the things that they do feel good about or can feel good about that are within their control. What's the smallest, and then introduce small small steps, right? Like, well, I like when my body feels healthy and capable. Great. Well, what's the smallest thing that you could do that you would do that would feed that feeling? When do you feel healthy? When I'm going for a walk in nature, well, let's go for a walk right now, 5 minutes. You know what I mean? And so you introduce things that build competence, which leads to the confidence. You don't attack necessarily the symptomology, go try to pull away all the negative. Let's balance the conversation and introduce that positive. So at least you have a balanced conversation and a balanced perspective on yourself that's happening internally. So yeah, I'm gonna, after the show, I'm gonna hit you up for a link, and we're gonna do something with this. This is an amazing, I don't know, I don't want to oversell it, but it sounds really cool. No, it sounds
Thanks.
cool.
Yeah. I'll hit you with like a promo code or something like that after this too for your listeners and everything, but we can talk about that after. But
We'll make Ian buy one. He has like
honestly, I think that it's not meant for like adults, but there's so much in there that would be beneficial for anybody, really.
That's what I said. We'll have Ian buy one, so it's all good.
Yeah, let me know.
I am not your child.
He's a young man. He's a very young man. So no, it's good. So listen, amazing. I'm going to learn more about that. So we're close on time, but I did want to ask, kind of one of those typical questions, but it is important. So knowing what you know now, your experiences you've had now, the journey that you've been through, right? So if you could go back and talk to that version of yourself that was first experiencing this, first becoming concerned with the anxiety she was feeling that discomfort, or one of our listeners, right, who is exactly in that spot right now, what would you say to that person? What advice would you give? What perspective would you offer? Just what would you offer them?
A really good question. Initial thought is that changing it would feel so like I feel like I'd be a completely different person if it was changed. So I wouldn't want to go to change. I think I would just remind her that support is around and support is there, and you just have to ask for it, and that her experience now is not going to be her experience forever. I think that's what I would do, because it's easy to say I would go to therapy and I did it and all this stuff, but I wouldn't be myself. So yeah, I think that's what I would want. I think if that were to have happened across the board, like my parents had the same experience, I think there would have been a more of an open tunnel for support. Yeah, I guess that.
You're not alone, and this isn't forever. I mean, there's so many versions of that I've heard on this show and through my work, and those are really the core things we're trying to offer people, right? You're not alone, and this isn't going to last forever. So,
yeah, and it's not everything is going to stay so intense. I think that's the thing too. It's like, because when you have separation from it, there are things that we thought were travesties that are now, or like, that was so silly. And not to discount the pain that maybe you felt in the moment, but yeah, it's just you'll have more space from it. Sure. Yeah. My most like used social media is Instagram. It's Therapy with Erica. And then my website's therapywithericaZ.com. And yeah, I work with people in New York. I do a little coaching too. I just don't advertise it very much. Just kind of people come out. But yeah, I mean, Instagram, connect with me there. You can join my newsletter. I try to share as much reflections and helpful tips as I can across whatever platform I'm on.
And that's the book with you? Like, you're taking patients right now?
Will talk with anybody and I'll check in, because I am somebody who wants to make sure that everyone has a connection to somebody. Because if you're reaching out for help and I can't help you, I want to make sure you have somebody. I have a couple spots for young adults that are during the day, and it depends. I'm pretty full, but this is my own boundary I'm working on. I'm pretty full, but yeah, you feel free to reach out. We can always have a conversation.
We are starved for therapists in this world, and the shortage is very real. So if people understand, as soon as you get a little bit soup behind your name and you let people know you're available, you are busy. So
yeah.
No, I understand that. Respect that too. So listen, hey, thank you for coming by. Thank you for your time so much. You're doing amazing work. As somebody who has suffered from anxiety in the past, dealt with it personally, and it's almost like addiction in a way. Do you ever feel like you're ever freed of anxiety? Like, it's always kind of back there, right? Like, so,
yeah.
But, well managed and high functioning. I just love your perspective on this. One of those people that I wish that I had early on in my journey too, because you see this very clearly. I think you see the issue really well and are very helpful with your perspectives. And it would have been nice to know that when I first was dealing with this stuff. So it's nice to know you're out there helping other people though. So thank you for all your work.
Thanks for having me. This was a blast. Really fun.
Yeah, awesome. So, and then I always close with thanks to you guys. Obviously, producers Ian is here. It's this, like he said, it's his show. It's Ian with Erica today. So Ian chipped in and gave some commentary, and we love that. Ian, it gives a fresh perspective on this stuff, and he takes care of all the driving and making sure that we look semi-reasonable and this stuff gets edited. So thank you, Ian, for the finished product, and thank you guys for watching and listening. However you're receiving this, whether it be on any of the streaming channels or our YouTube channel, whatever it is, we appreciate you. I say it every episode: time is your most valuable asset, and you chose to spend that with us. So much love for that, much appreciation and gratitude, and I hope it was worth your time. I hope it was worth the investment. So thank you for coming by, and we'll close here. So until next time, please take care of yourself and remember to take care of each other. Thanks. Hey guys, although Through Help and Back is an excellent podcast with a lot of great ideas, I do want to let you know that in no way is Through Help and Back expected to be perceived as or relied upon in any way as specific medical advice or mental health advice for you personally. The information provided through Help and Back on our website or our podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment that can be provided by your own providers. Do not use our content in lieu of professional advice given by qualified medical professionals, and do not disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking professional advice because of the information you have read on our website, heard on our podcast, or otherwise received from us. Although we love discussing issues related to healthcare, mental health, and addiction, we are not providing direct healthcare, mental health care, medical, or nutrition therapy services. We're not attempting to diagnose, treat, prevent, or cure in any manner whatsoever any physical or psychological ailment, any mental or emotional issue, disease, or condition. We are not giving you specific medical, psychological, or religious advice whatsoever. Please take care of yourself and take care of others as you always seek the advice of your own medical providers and your own mental health providers regarding any questions or concerns you have about your specific health, or before implementing any recommendations or suggestions from us. These are ideas that have worked for other people. We think it's important to share them. We do not guarantee that they will work for you specifically. Do not stop taking any medications without speaking to your physician, nurse practitioner, physician assistant, mental health provider, or any other healthcare or medical professional. And if you have or suspect that you have a medical or mental health issue, contact your own healthcare provider promptly. Also, one last thing, if you know or suspect that you are currently experiencing a crisis, it is absolutely imperative that you seek the advice of your doctor or other emergency healthcare services prior to ever thinking about using our content. We love the conversations. We're glad you're stopping by. We hope you take a lot from the content. But again, for your specific individual medical situation, please always seek quality personal care from your own providers. Do not let this information or this advice stand on its own. Thanks so much for listening.